It's funny, isn't it? How the people you trust the most, the ones you believe know you better than anyone, can be the ones hiding the most shattering secrets. And not just secrets, but a complete, utter double life. My mother, my devout mother. The woman who volunteered endless hours at church, who baked cookies for every bake sale, who organized the annual charity drives. The one who taught me about right and wrong, about integrity, about faith. She was living a lie so profound, so sickening, that it ripped through the very fabric of our family, our community, and my entire understanding of who she was. I'm going to take you through every raw, painful, and ultimately vindicating step of how my own flesh and blood completely shattered my trust and my life. This isn't just a story, it's the unraveling of a family, a complex web of deceit that took years to untangle, and how I ultimately found my way back from the brink. Seriously, this is probably the most detailed, most personal story I've ever shared. You might want to grab a coffee or tea, because we're going deep. Alright, so to truly understand the depth of this wound, we need to go back. This all started around 7 years ago. At that time, my relationship with my mother, Eleanor, was what I genuinely believed was unbreakable. She was my rock, my confidante, my biggest supporter. We talked almost every day, shared everything. She was the quintessential pillar of our small, tight-knit suburban community. Her life revolved around two things: her family, my father, my younger brother, and me, and the Church of the Sacred Heart. And within that church, her passion, her calling, was the Hands of Compassion charity. If I had to give this entire agonizing chapter of my life a title, it would simply be The Unforgivable Betrayal: How My Own Family Broke Me and How I Fought Back. More specifically, my mother's secret double life. Growing up, the church wasn't just a place we went on Sundays. It was intertwined with our identity. My father was an elder, my brother and I served as altar servers, and my mother was the heart of the place. She coordinated all the social events, ran the weekly prayer group, and most importantly, she was the head of the Hands of Compassion charity. This wasn't some small-time bake sale fund. Hands of Compassion provided real tangible aid to families in crisis: utility bill assistance, rent relief, food vouchers, even medical expense support for uninsured members of the community. It was funded entirely by donations from the congregation, from small weekly offerings to substantial year-end gifts from our more affluent members. My mother presented herself as the ultimate steward of these funds, a woman of unshakable faith and boundless generosity. Her commitment was legendary. She'd spend countless hours at the church office, meticulously poring over applications, organizing distributions, and, as she often told us, making sure every single cent goes where it's truly needed. And I believed her. Implicitly. Why wouldn't I? She was my mother. She taught Sunday school. She quoted scripture. She had this serene, almost angelic presence when she spoke about helping others. I remember once, when I was about 10, watching her carefully count out cash for a family whose house had burned down. Her face was etched with such profound empathy, such genuine sorrow for their plight, that it solidified in my young mind that she was pure good. She instilled in us the importance of giving back, of being honest, of living by the values of our faith. God sees everything, dear, she'd say, and so does your conscience. The first few years after I moved out for college and then for my first job in the city, our bond remained strong. I'd call her every Sunday after church, eager to hear about the sermon, about Mrs. Henderson's latest casserole, about how the Hands of Compassion was making a difference. She'd regale me with stories of families they'd helped, the gratitude in their voices, the hope restored. I even donated regularly, small amounts from my modest salary, feeling a genuine connection to the good work she was doing. It felt like, even from a distance, I was still a part of that virtuous circle. Looking back, the early cracks were so subtle, so easily dismissed, that it infuriates me now to think how blind I was. They started small, with little things that in hindsight felt off. Like when she'd suddenly have new expensive clothes or a piece of jewelry that seemed out of character for our family's relatively modest means. My father was a high school teacher. My mother didn't work outside the home, dedicating herself to the church and us. Our budget was always tight, careful. Yet there were these sporadic, unexplained splurges. I'd ask her about a new designer handbag, and she'd wave it off. Oh, just a great sale. Or a gift from your aunt, and I'd accept it. Why wouldn't I? My mother wasn't materialistic. She preached against it. Then there were the increasingly frequent, brief trips she'd take. a women's retreat, she'd say, or a spiritual conference for charity leaders. Always vague, always a different small town a few hours away. She'd come back refreshed, almost giddy, but again, I didn't question it. She deserved a break. She worked tirelessly for the church, after all. The real red flags began to appear when I moved back home temporarily after a job loss. My lease was up, and it made financial sense to save some money for a few months. This was about 3 years into the hands of compassion being her primary focus. Being back in the house, I started noticing patterns. She was spending an extraordinary amount of time in her home office, far more than just managing a charity. She'd often lock the door, which was highly unusual. Our house was always open, always bustling. If I knocked, she'd sometimes snap, a sharp, uncharacteristic edge to her voice. "Just a minute, I'm on a call." When she emerged, she'd look flustered, her hair a bit disheveled, but would quickly compose herself, offering a warm smile and suggesting we get coffee. I also noticed an increase in cash, not just small amounts but hundreds, sometimes thousands, tucked away in various envelopes in her desk drawers. When I innocently asked about it once, she said it was church petty cash for immediate charity needs that couldn't wait for checks to clear. It sounded plausible. She was the one everyone turned to. She did handle emergencies. The first truly jarring incident occurred one evening. I was home alone with her. My dad was at a school board meeting, my brother at college. I was looking for a specific book on personal finance that I knew my dad kept in her office. The door was for once unlocked. I walked in, and she was hunched over her desk, a ledger open, surrounded by stacks of what looked like bank statements and withdrawal slips. But what caught my eye wasn't just the paperwork. It was the intense, almost manic look on her face as she scribbled furiously. And then I heard her mutter, No, that's not right. It needs to be less here, more there." It was the tone, the furtive urgency that unsettled me. She wasn't praying, she wasn't doing charity work. She looked like she was balancing a very precarious, secret set of books. She jumped, startled, when I cleared my throat. The ledger slammed shut, a stack of withdrawal slips scattered across the desk. Her eyes, usually so soft, were wide with a panic I'd never seen. "Oh, darling, you scared me." She laughed, but it was a brittle, forced sound. "Just finishing up some church accounts. Very complex, you know." She quickly gathered the scattered slips, almost too quickly, sweeping them into a drawer. I mumbled about the book, found it, and left. But a seed of unease had been planted. It wasn't just the locked door or the cash anymore. It was the shift in her demeanor, the sudden defensiveness, the quick change act. Over the next few months, these little inconsistencies piled up. I noticed she was much more secretive about the charity's financials. When I'd ask about the Hands of Compassion budget or how much they'd raised that quarter, she'd become vague, even dismissive. "Oh, it's all handled," she'd say, or "You don't need to worry your pretty little head about the numbers, dear." This was unlike her. She used to be so open, so proud to share the charity's successes. Now it was as if a wall had gone up. Then came the calls. She started receiving anonymous phone calls late at night. She'd answer them in a whisper, often rushing to another room, her voice barely audible. Once I heard her say, No, the transfer wasn't supposed to be that much, we need to adjust it." Another time, "I told you, I'm working on it, be patient." These weren't the hushed, comforting tones of a charity worker. These were the clipped, anxious tones of someone conducting illicit business. My stomach would clench every time the phone rang after 9 p.m. My father, bless his oblivious heart, didn't seem to notice any of it. He was engrossed in his teaching and school board duties, implicitly trusting his wife, as he always had. My brother was away at college, caught up in his own world. It was just me, living under the same roof, witnessing this slow, unsettling transformation. I started to feel like a detective in my own home, piecing together fragments of a puzzle I desperately hoped I was misinterpreting. The real breaking point, the moment the world tilted on its axis, happened during the annual Hands of Compassion Gala. This was the charity's biggest fundraiser of the year, a black tie event that raised tens of thousands of dollars. My mother, as always, was the star. She stood on stage, tearfully thanking everyone for their generosity, speaking passionately about the lives they were changing. She announced the grand total raised, an astonishing $85,000. The crowd erupted in applause. My chest swelled with pride for her, despite the nagging doubts. But later that night, after everyone had gone home and only a few volunteers were left cleaning up, I overheard a conversation. Mrs. Davison, a sweet elderly woman who meticulously handled the cash and check donations at the event, was talking to Father Michael, the head priest. Mrs. Davison looked distressed. "Father, I'm just so confused," she was saying, her voice shaky. "We counted every donation twice. The pledges, the checks, the cash. My tally was over $110,000. How did Mrs. Ovens get $85,000 as the final figure?" My blood ran cold. $110,000 versus $85,000. That was a $25,000 discrepancy. My mother, Eleanor Evans, was Mrs. Evans. My mother was the one who announced the final figure. Father Michael, looking puzzled, just patted Mrs. Davison's arm. "Perhaps a clerical error, dear. Eleanor is so overwhelmed with the charity work, she might have rounded down, or maybe some pledges haven't come in yet." But Mrs. Davison shook her head emphatically. "No, Father. These were confirmed donations. Every one. I double-checked the ledger entries myself before I gave them to Eleanor to reconcile." I remember that moment clearly. The air left my lungs, and a cold, hard resolve settled in. This is it, I thought. Enough is enough. They crossed a line they can never uncross. The seed of unease had finally blossomed into a terrifying certainty. My mother, the paragon of virtue, was stealing, not just from individuals, but from the church, from the charity, from the very people she claimed to serve. The clerical error explanation was a flimsy veil that couldn't hide the ugly truth. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My mother embezzling. It felt like the ground beneath me had evaporated. The woman who lectured me on honesty, who taught me the 10 Commandments, was systematically siphoning money meant for the poor and vulnerable. My stomach churned. A wave of nausea washed over me. I had to get out of there before I confronted her, before I did something I'd regret. I mumbled a hasty goodbye to a few volunteers and practically ran out of the church, the grand total of $85,000 echoing in my ears, mocking me. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced, replaying every suspicious incident: the locked office door, the vague explanations, the late-night calls, the sudden appearance of expensive items. It all clicked into place, forming a horrifying tapestry of deceit. My anger was a hot, searing flame, but beneath it was a profound, aching sorrow. How could she? How could my mother do this? The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was a betrayal of everything I thought I knew about her, about our family, about the very concept of trust. I felt violated, like a fool for having been so blind, so trusting. The next morning I woke up with a singular, overwhelming purpose. I had to find out the truth, every single detail. And then I had to do something about it. My first thought was to confront her directly, to unleash all my pain and fury. But a cooler, more logical part of my brain intervened. If she was truly embezzling, a direct confrontation would just lead to denial, deflection, and her covering her tracks. I needed proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof. My immediate raw emotional fallout was a constant knot in my stomach. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep properly. Every conversation with her felt like a performance, a charade. I'd look at her, her serene face, her kind eyes, and a wave of revulsion would wash over me. The woman I saw was a stranger, a master manipulator. Thoughts of revenge flickered through my mind. Expose her immediately, shout it from the rooftops. But then thoughts of my father, my brother, the scandal, the absolute devastation it would cause. It held me back. This wasn't just about my pain. It was about the potential destruction of our entire family, our standing in the community. It was about Father Michael, Mrs. Davison, and every innocent soul who had donated to Hands of Compassion. My internal struggle was agonizing. Do I protect my family name and let this continue? Or do I expose the truth and shatter everything? The answer, slow and painful, began to emerge. I had to expose it, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need for justice, for restitution for those who had been wronged. I couldn't live with myself knowing that my mother was stealing from the needy, under the guise of piety, and I was silently complicit. I started to conceive my plan. It was slow, meticulous, and terrifying. My first step was to discreetly gather more evidence. I couldn't just rely on Mrs. Davison's overheard conversation. I needed hard data. My father kept meticulous records for everything. I knew he had access to the church's financial statements, as he was an elder and often reviewed budgets. I decided I needed to get my hands on the official Hands of Compassion financial reports. I started by casually asking my father if he had copies of the charity's annual reports. "Just curious, Dad," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "I was thinking of making a larger donation this year, and I like to see where the money goes." He, always trusting, readily agreed to look for them, but mentioned that my mother usually kept the most up-to-date copies since she managed the charity's day-to-day. This was good. It confirmed she had access to everything. My research undertaken involved becoming an amateur forensic accountant, and a rather terrified one at that. I spent hours online, researching embezzlement schemes, how they're typically structured, what kind of paper trail they leave. I read about different types of financial fraud, particularly within nonprofits. It was a steep learning curve. I learned about shell corporations, false invoices, altered ledger entries. My stomach clenched every time I read a case study that mirrored the vague suspicions I had about my mother. I also learned about the importance of an audit trail. Every transaction, every receipt. My new skill learned was how to be utterly unreadable. I had to act normal, engaged, loving, even as a cold dread settled in my heart every time I looked at her. I couldn't let on that I suspected anything. My very safety and the success of my plan depended on it. This was the immense patience and emotional toll this phase took. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, constantly aware of my own facial expressions, my tone of voice. Every smile I gave her felt like a lie. Every "I love you, Mom" felt like a betrayal of my own conscience. Obstacles and setbacks faced during this planning period were numerous. The biggest one was access. My mother kept her office locked more frequently now. She seemed to have an almost sixth sense about my presence, often emerging just as I got close to her office door. There were countless nights I almost gave up, where the weight of it all felt too heavy, like when I tried to sneak into her office late one night after she'd supposedly gone to bed. I heard the floorboards creak behind me and turned to see her standing there, a shadow in the doorway, her voice calm but chillingly alert. "Something you're looking for, dear?" I mumbled something about needing a glass of water, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. She just watched me, her eyes unblinking, until I retreated. It was a demoralizing setback, making me realize how careful she was and how easily I could compromise my mission. I realized I couldn't break into her office directly. That would be too risky, too obvious. I needed another way in. I started observing her habits even more closely. I noticed that when she went grocery shopping, or to her weekly prayer group, she'd often leave her purse on the kitchen counter, or sometimes on the armchair by the front door. And in her purse, I knew, was her keyring. This was a major turning point. I needed to get a copy of her office key. The thought of it made me feel like a criminal, but the alternative, letting her continue to steal from vulnerable people, felt far worse. One Tuesday morning, she left for her prayer group. A rare instance where she was out of the house for a guaranteed few hours. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst when I finally grabbed her purse. My hands were shaking as I rummaged through it, finding the small distinctive key for her office. I had scouted out a locksmith earlier in the week, one in a neighboring town where I wouldn't be recognized. I drove there, my palms sweating on the steering wheel, got a copy made in under 5 minutes and drove back, the new key a cold metallic weight in my pocket. I returned her purse, placing it exactly where I found it, my mind racing. The clock was ticking. I had only a few hours before she returned. That same day, after she was safely out of the house again, I used the copied key. The click of the lock was unnervingly loud in the silent house. The air in her office felt heavy, charged with secrets. I closed the door behind me and took a deep breath. My heart hammered against my ribs. My eyes darted around the room. I was looking for anything: bank statements, ledgers, withdrawal slips, anything that showed a discrepancy between reported funds and actual funds. I started with the desk drawers, moving slowly, carefully, trying not to disturb anything. The top drawer held a neatly organized collection of pens and stationery. The second drawer, that's where I found it. Tucked beneath a stack of old utility bills, I found 2 separate ledgers. One was a meticulous, official-looking ledger, labeled Hands of Compassion Official Records. The entries looked clean, orderly, reflecting the $85,000 announced at the gala. But beneath that, there was a second, smaller, battered ledger, bound with a rubber band. It was simply labeled Personal. And this one was my mother's true confession. In it, she detailed every single donation received by the charity, cross-referenced with a second column that showed how much was actually deposited into the Hands of Compassion account, and a third column that explicitly noted the difference. And that difference was systematically funneled into various personal accounts, some in her name, some under shell corporations I'd never heard of. There were even dates and amounts marked for cash withdrawals, personal use. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. The numbers were staggering. It wasn't just the $25,000 from the gala. It was thousands, tens of thousands, stretching back years. She had been siphoning money, little by little, then in larger chunks ever since she took over the charity. I also found bank statements for accounts I didn't recognize, accounts that didn't belong to my parents' joint funds. These statements clearly showed large deposits far exceeding any income my mother legitimately had. And alongside them a stack of wire transfer receipts, many of them to offshore accounts. This was far more sophisticated than I had imagined. This wasn't just a moment of weakness. This was a calculated, sustained operation. I worked quickly, taking photos of every single incriminating page with my phone, making sure the lighting was good and the numbers were legible. I photographed the two ledgers side by side, the official and the secret one, showing the blatant discrepancies. I photographed the personal bank statements, the wire transfer receipts, even a few cryptic notes that hinted at accomplices, though their names were only initials. It was a digital treasure trove of undeniable evidence. I felt a cold dread in my stomach, but also a grim satisfaction. I had it, all of it. I returned everything exactly as I found it. The rubber band back on the secret ledger, the bills stacked neatly, the drawers closed. I wiped down everything I had touched, a frantic paranoia gripping me. I locked the office door behind me, the click echoing in the sudden silence of the house. I had maybe an hour before she returned. I uploaded all the photos to a secure cloud server, then deleted them from my phone's camera roll, and deleted them from the recently deleted folder. No trace. The next few days were a blur of internal turmoil. I had the proof, now what? Confront her? Go to my father? The thought of tearing our family apart was agonizing. But the thought of letting her continue, of allowing vulnerable people to suffer while she lived a secret life of luxury funded by stolen charity money, was even more repulsive. My conscience screamed at me. I had to tell someone official. I researched the church's hierarchy, the diocese. They were the ultimate authority. It seemed like the most appropriate and responsible channel. I knew going to the police first would be too aggressive, too public, too immediate for the sake of the church's reputation and my family's, well, what little remained of it. I wanted to give the church itself a chance to handle it, to investigate, to make restitution. But I wasn't naive. I knew this would have massive repercussions. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst when I finally made the appointment. I called the diocesan office, asking for someone in financial oversight, vaguely stating I had sensitive information regarding a church charity. They were cautious but agreed to meet. I didn't use my real name at first, just an alias, a protective measure. I wanted to gauge their reaction before revealing the full extent of the scandal and my personal connection to it. The meeting took place a week later in a nondescript office building downtown. I was ushered into a small, sterile room where a stern-faced woman named Ms. Davis, who introduced herself as the head of the diocesan internal audit department, and a mild-mannered man, Father Thomas, a legal advisor for the diocese, sat waiting. I explained, in broad strokes at first, my concerns about financial irregularities within the Hands of Compassion charity, emphasizing the discrepancy from the annual gala. They listened, their expressions unreadable. Then, with a deep breath, I pulled out my tablet and began to show them the photos. The two ledgers side by side, the marked discrepancies, the personal bank statements, the wire transfers. I showed them the dates, the amounts, the carefully tabulated differences that amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars over several years. I walked them through my findings, explaining my deductions based on the research I'd done. The room was silent except for the click of the tablet as I scrolled through the images. Their expressions slowly changed from skeptical to shocked, then to grim. Ms. Davies's face became ashen. Father Thomas leaned forward, his eyes scanning the documents intently. When I finished, the silence stretched, heavy and oppressive. Finally, Ms. Davis cleared her throat. This "This is extremely serious," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "These are very compelling allegations. Do you—" This was the moment. The truth, raw and ugly, had to come out. My voice was shaky, but I looked her directly in the eye. "Yes," I said. "I do. It's my mother, Eleanor Evans." The gasp from Father Thomas was audible. Miss Davis just stared at me, a mixture of horror and disbelief on her face. "Your mother," she repeated, as if the words themselves were too impossible to comprehend. "Eleanor Evans? The head of Hands of Compassion? The most respected volunteer we have?" "The same," I confirmed, a bitter taste in my mouth. "She's been living a double life. The evidence is undeniable. I found these in her private office at home." I briefly explained how I obtained the evidence, omitting the part about the copied key, simply stating I had access to her private files due to living at home. I emphasized that I did this not out of malice, but because I could not stand by and watch the church and the needy be defrauded. Ms. Davies collected herself. "We will need these images. We will need to conduct our own internal audit. This is a devastating blow to the trust of the congregation." Father Thomas simply shook his head, his face etched with profound sadness. "They assured me they would investigate thoroughly and discreetly. They asked for my contact information, assuring me of strict confidentiality." I left the meeting feeling drained, but also, for the first time in a long time, a flicker of hope. I had done the right thing. The truth was out there. The next few weeks were excruciating. I lived in a constant state of anxiety, waiting for the other shoe to drop. My mother seemed to sense a shift. She was more watchful, more on edge. She started asking me pointed questions. "Did you talk to anyone from the church recently? Are you worried about anything, dear?" I'd deflect, feign ignorance, my heart pounding in my chest. The tension in our house was palpable, a silent scream. Then, about a month after my meeting with the diocese, the storm hit. It started subtly. My mother received a formal letter from the diocese, informing her of an upcoming routine audit of the Hands of Compassion charity, citing new diocesan regulations. She scoffed at it, dismissing it as bureaucratic red tape, but I saw the flicker of unease in her eyes. The auditors arrived. Two grim-faced individuals. Not Ms. Davies or Father Thomas, but their subordinates. They set up shop in the church office, requesting all of my mother's financial records for the charity. She put on a brave face, presenting the official ledgers, the official bank statements, but I knew, and she knew, what was coming. The confrontation itself didn't happen in a grand, dramatic moment in front of the whole congregation. It happened quietly, devastatingly, in the rectory office behind closed doors. I wasn't there, but my father was, having been called in by Father Michael after the auditors presented their findings. My father called me that evening, his voice hollow, broken. "She did it," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Your mother," she admitted to it. "They found everything, the secret accounts, the transfers, everything." He sounded like a man whose entire world had crumbled. He told me the diocese had confronted her with the evidence, the exact digital copies I had provided. Faced with undeniable proof, she had finally confessed. The betrayer's downfall, the moment I had both dreaded and yearned for, arrived. My father recounted the scene. My mother, initially defensive and indignant, had crumpled under the weight of the evidence. She had wept, begged for mercy, for a chance to make it right. But it was too late. The diocese had already involved law enforcement, albeit quietly, given the sensitive nature of the case and the church's desire to minimize public scandal. She was facing criminal charges for embezzlement. The church, however, offered a path. Immediate, full restitution of all stolen funds, coupled with a public apology to the congregation, and a commitment to cooperate fully with the investigation, in exchange for a lighter sentence recommendation from the church's side and an avoidance of the harshest public outcry. The total amount stolen, confirmed by the audit, was over $400,000. I felt a complex mix of emotions at this climax. Vindication, sadness, exhaustion, relief. Vindication, because the truth was out, and justice was being served. Sadness, because it was my own mother, and the destruction was immense. Exhaustion, from the years of suspicion, the agonizing investigation, the constant emotional strain. And relief, a profound, liberating relief, that the secret was finally out, the charade was over. The full consequences for my mother were swift and brutal. She was formally stripped of all her church duties, her volunteer positions. The news, though initially contained within the church leadership, eventually leaked, not in a massive front-page headline way, but through whispers, murmurs, and eventually, open gossip within the community. The betrayal ran deep. Members of the congregation, many of whom had donated their hard-earned money, felt personally violated. The Hands of Compassion charity was temporarily suspended, undergoing a complete restructuring and external audit. My mother eventually faced legal proceedings. Due to the church's plea for a more lenient approach in exchange for restitution and her cooperation, she avoided a lengthy prison sentence, but she was given a suspended sentence, extensive probation, and ordered to pay full restitution, which she would never be able to do on her own. My father, in a testament to his good nature and perhaps a misguided sense of loyalty, took out a second mortgage on our family home to cover the restitution. It broke him financially and emotionally. The house, our sanctuary, was now mortgaged to cover her crimes. My life fundamentally changed after the resolution of the betrayal. The family, as I knew it, was shattered. My father, once a jovial, trusting man, became quiet, withdrawn, aged beyond his years. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was laced with a palpable bitterness. My brother, who was initially furious with me for exposing her, eventually came to terms with the necessity of it, but the damage to our sibling bond was significant. He struggled with the public shame, the questions from his friends. And my relationship with my mother? It became a wasteland. We still live in the same town, but our interactions are formal, strained. The easy affection, the shared laughter, the deep trust, it's all gone, replaced by a chasm of resentment and regret. She tried to apologize, to explain, to plead for forgiveness. She claimed it started small, just a few dollars here and there for unexpected bills, and then spiraled out of control. She expressed remorse, but I saw it through the lens of her confession only happening when she was caught. I couldn't unsee the calculated deceit, the years of lies. I couldn't unfeel the depth of her betrayal. The trust was gone, irrevocably broken. The process of healing and rebuilding has been long and arduous. For me, it involved therapy, deep introspection, and a painful reevaluation of my own judgment. I learned to trust my instincts more, to question even the most revered figures. It also instilled in me a fierce sense of justice and a profound understanding of the devastating impact of betrayal, especially within families. I had to redefine what family meant to me, moving beyond blood ties to include those who genuinely offered unwavering support and honesty. Looking back on it all now, after all these years, I feel a profound sense of peace mixed with lingering sadness. I am stronger than ever before, but forever changed. The little girl who believed in her angelic mother, who saw only good in the world, is gone. In her place is a woman who understands the complexities of human nature, the darkness that can lurk beneath the most pious facade, and the incredible resilience required to fight for truth, even when it means tearing your own world apart. I carry the scars, yes, but also the strength that came from facing the unbearable and surviving. So, yeah, that's the story. That entire period was one of the most brutal and transformative of my life. It took everything out of me, but it also taught me invaluable lessons about trust, resilience, setting boundaries, and self-worth. It taught me that sometimes the hardest choices are the only right choices, no matter the personal cost. I'm sharing this because I believe many of you have faced some form of betrayal, even if your own experiences weren't this extreme, to show that even from the deepest wounds you can heal and rebuild, to shine a light on the hidden complexities of family dynamics and the sometimes uncomfortable truth that family doesn't always mean unconditional good. Maybe some of you can relate to the pain of betrayal, or the difficult decision to prioritize truth over loyalty. All right, everyone, that's it from me for this one. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.